on this computer. So within a single word, a single word can have multiple morphemes. It can have one morpheme. So like the word boy, desire, meditate. But by adding an additional, we can add additional components to this elementary form. So we can turn boy into boyish, and that's two morphemes, boy and ish. We can turn desire into desirable, meditate to meditation by adding these other smaller morphemes, ish, able, and shun. And as you can see, these are free morphemes and they communicate meaning on their own, but these ish, able, and shun need to be attached to another morpheme to communicate meaning. So you can have also three morphemes, so boy, ish, ness. Desirability, there's a typo there, so desire, able, itty. 4 morphemes, gentle, manly, ness. Undesirable, itty. So a morpheme is an arbitrary union of sound and meaning that cannot be further analyzed. So it's the smallest unit of meaning in language. It cannot be further analyzed, meaning that smaller than a morpheme is a sound, a single sound. But oftentimes single sounds in English don't have any meaning whatsoever, but that those single sounds need to combine with another sound and form a morpheme. So morpheme, in this sense, is truly the smallest unit of meaning in the English language. So every word in every language is composed of one or more morphemes. There are inconsistencies in the application of morpheme. So you have the noun singers, right? Singers sing. So singers, noun, sing is the verb. So what do singers do? They sing. Flingers, fling. Fingers, fing. Fingers don't fing. So in this sense, ers typically can refer to things that people do. So the morpheme is the act of doing something, but you can't say that fingers fing. It doesn't make any sense. So finger is a single morpheme on its own, even though it ends with ER, like these words. Even though it ends with ER, it actually cannot be extracted or taken away from fing. Okay, so it's a monomorphemic word. So it's made up of one single morpheme. The final ER in finger is not a separate morpheme, so it cannot be separated. A finger is not something that fings. So there are exceptions to the rule. So not always will you have the same combination of words acting like a morpheme. The meaning of a morpheme must be constant, but just because it's constant, it doesn't mean that it will always be the same. We can have identical forms like ER, but they could have different meaning. So ER can be used to talk about agency or the action, but ER is also used as a comparative morpheme. So see below, we have sing, paint, love, work, which are all verbs. And to these verbs, we add the ER, and suddenly these verbs are turned into nouns. So people that sing, singer, people that paint, painter, people that love, lover, and people who work, worker, right? But we can also use it not just to refer to people that do something as an agent, but we can also say as a comparison, use that ER. So someone is nicer than somebody else. Somebody is prettier than somebody else, and somebody is taller than somebody else. So in this sense, we have the same combination of sounds or the same morpheme, ER, but it's used to communicate different meanings, a doer or an agent versus comparison. So the same way, we can also have different forms or morphemes that have the same meaning. So we can have and stir, which are both used to talk about somebody who does something, right? So singer or songster. So stir here is an agent. A fundamental property of morphology is the property of discreteness. What is discreteness? When we talk about discreteness, we're talking about the ability of a word to be decomposed to smaller meaningful units, and then we can use those small meaningful units and recombine them in novel ways to shape a new word. So this property of discreteness is something that's unique to mankind, and it's ultimately as well another reason why human language is different from animal communication, because animal communication doesn't have this ability to decompose string of words or meaning and recombine them. So again, this also ties into the idea of linguistic creativity. So here's some examples of discreteness in morphemes. We can have the word tweet, like from Twitter, and we can say that something's tweetable. So it has that appeal, it has that energy, that like an adjective, tweetable. We can say tweeter to talk about somebody who tweets. Or we can say retweet to the act of recopying something that somebody else said. So in this case, we have the same base morpheme, tweet, 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 and it's combining with able, and re to form a new meaning. So we have this capacity of discreteness. So there are two types of morphemes in the English language. We have bound and free morphemes. So bound morphemes cannot stand alone and communicate meaning, but bound morphemes need to be attached to another morpheme so they could be grammatical or make sense. A free morpheme can stand on its own and communicate meaning. What's an example of a free morpheme? Boy. ¿Verdad? Nene, boy. What is an example of a bound morpheme? Ish. We can't say ish and have people understand, but ish needs to be attached to boy, the noun boy, so then it's boyish, an adjective that describes the act of being maybe masculine or like a boy. So free versus bound morphemes. In the column on your left, we have the free morphemes. On the right, we have the bound morphemes. So within the free morpheme category, we can have boy, desire, gentle, late. So we can have content words. But also within the free morpheme, we can also have function words like with, but, and the. So the point is that they can stand on their own and be grammatical. But ish, ness, li, pre, trans, un, no. On their own, they are useless. They need to attach to a free morpheme to communicate a word or a meaning in a word. So here's kind of the breakdown between a morpheme. We have free, we have bound. So free morphemes can be lexical or content words like teach and elephant, and they can also be functional like and, the, so, and but. Morphemes can be bound, so they can be grammatical, so to do with the inflection, so the past tense to form progressive tense to form the plural form, or bound morphemes can also be the word they can also be derivational. So these words have less of a grammatical meaning, and we'll talk a little bit about derivational morphology quite soon. So prefixes and suffixes are some good examples of morphemes, and probably that's how you would know them as before this class. So prefixes are attached to the beginning of a word or before a morpheme, and suffixes are attached at the end or after a morpheme. So some examples of prefixes are un, pre, and by. Some examples of suffixes are ist, and li. Morphemes that are inserted into other morphemes are called infixes. Okay, so they're inserted in the middle. Now, these type of morphemes are actually not found in the English language. In the English language, we have prefixes and suffixes, but infixes, which means inside, they can be found in an indigenous language in the Philippines called Bontoc. So they have this characteristic. So the morpheme is used to turn an adjective into a verb. So the word ficas is strong, kilad is red, fusul is enemy, humusi is poor, I think. So if you want to turn these words or nouns into verbs, you add the morpheme So ficas, fumicas, to be strong. Kilad, kumilad, to be red. Fusul, fumusul, to be an enemy, and so on. Okay, so again, the property of having an infix is not found in the English language unless you consider colloquialisms. So sometimes you can say abso-bloody-lutely, or you can say no freaking way. Well, that's not a good example. You can say, I'm thinking of an example. So put an expletive like the F word or freaking in the middle of a word, and that could act like an infix. Circumfixes are also even less found in the English language. We don't have circumfixes, not even in colloquialisms, but they are found in other world's languages, such as Chickasaw, which is an indigenous language spoken in Oklahoma. So you circumfix basically surrounds a morpheme. So it has a bit that occurs at the beginning and a bit that occurs at the end. So it's circular. So it can have ik and o, right? So you have the word chakma, he is good. Lakna, it is yellow. Pali, it is hot. And all of these words are in the affirmative voice. But if we want to turn them into a negative voice, we add the circumfix ik and o at the end. So chakma becomes ikokmo. I'm saying this wrong. Yeah. He isn't good. And it is yellow becomes it isn't yellow. It is hot becomes it isn't hot. And it's because these circumfixes are being added. So when we talk about morphemes and morphology, there's also some technical vocabulary to keep in mind, such as the word root. So when we talk about the root of a word, we're talking about the essence or the main component of that word, okay? So it may or may not stand on its own. Most of the time, the root of the word could stand up on its own, but there are instances where it can't stand on its own. So in the word painting, the root of painting is paint. Paint can stand on its own. In the word reader, read is the root. Read can stand on its own. In the word linguist, ling is the root. Ling cannot stand on its own, cannot. So the result of having a root morpheme combined with an affix like a prefix or a suffix, when you combine them, the root with an affix, you have the stem. So the root, the seed, you put the root, and then you add an affix, it's a stem, it's larger. So the root of Chomsky, which is the famous linguist, is Chomsky because Chomsky is the proper noun, and you can't divide Chomsky into anything smaller than that, because then it wouldn't communicate meaning. A stem would be adding the root Chomsky with an affix like Chomskite, maybe somebody who follows Chomsky. And even more than that would be Chomskites, so a word. So it's a community of people who follow Chomsky. Root, believe, it's a stem when you add the affix able, right? And it could be a word if you add anything more than that, unbelievable. Root system, it's a stem in systematic, and it's a word unsystematically, okay? So linguists sometimes use the word base to refer to any root or stem to which an affix is attached. So the base of a word that has the affix attached to form the stem. So system, systematic, unsystematic, and unsystematical are all bases. And you can have bound roots. So bound roots are the roots that they require a combination to another morpheme to communicate meaning. So sieve cannot stand on its own. It needs to be attached to something else. Receive, conceive, perceive, deceive, right? And mit needs to be attached to something else as well to communicate meaning. So these are bound. And as you can see, there's a lot of terminologies that get repeated. So we were talking about free morphemes and bound morphemes. And now we're talking about bound roots. So all of this terminology is related. So the rules of word formation are also stored in our brain. So we know, we have the capacity to know when to use a specific suffix or prefix, right? So morphology includes the knowledge of individual morphemes, their pronunciation, their meaning, and knowledge of how to combine them into complex words. So adding a phi to an adjective and forming a verb, we have knowledge of this. So these are all adjectives: pure, ample, simple, false. And we add a phi, and then we have purify, amplify, simplify, falsify. Adding cation to a verb, and then we can have a noun: simplification, glorification, personification. And sometimes as well in Puerto Rico, we have people that know this rule of word formation, and they use it in their Spanish to be funny. O sea, como que adding the cation to talk about a noun. So the hierarchical structure of words. A word is not just a simple sequence of morphemes. A word has internal structure, the same way that a sentence has structure. So unsystematic is composed of 3 morphemes: un, system, and atic. So the internal structure of this word would be that it has a root of the word, and that root is the content word system. Okay, so system, root of the word, also a noun. Then we add the suffix atic, right? So systematic is the stem, and then we add the morpheme prefix un for unsystematic, which is the adjective and the resulting word. And that's the internal structure. So derivational morphemes, phi and cation, like the one that we discussed, as well as others, are added to a base, and they result in a new word with a new meaning derived from that base. So we had systematic, right? If we add anything else, it could result in a new word. This means that we must have a list of derivational morphemes in our mental dictionaries, as well as the rules that determine how they are added to a root or a stem. So a derived word is the result of the addition of a derivational morpheme to a base. So here are some examples of derivational morphology. So we have the base boy, virtue, Elizabeth, right? So we turn these nouns or this base into an adjective by adding ish, us, an, esk, ate. So this is derivational. So we have content words: acquit, clear, right? Sing, conform, predict, and we add morpheme al, ans, ation, and then we have a new part of speech. So noun to adjective, verbs to nouns, verbs to adjective, adjective to noun. So basically derivational morphology is all to do with when you take a morpheme and you turn a word into a new word, okay, or into a word with a different meaning. Now, it doesn't always result in the change of a grammatical class. So it's not always that we have this shift from noun to adjective, but sometimes we can change a noun to a different kind of noun. So friend can become friendship, which is a larger collection of friends. Human can become humanity, a larger collection of humans. And verb can become another verb. So do and undo. So do is affirmative, undo is negative. Adjective to another adjective. So we have pink. We can say something also is pinkish, so the quality of being pink. So here we don't really see that much of a change, a drastic change in meaning, but it's still a slight change in meaning nonetheless. And this is truly what derivational morphology is about. It's about words that are all related and they derive from one another, but they can result in a change of meaning just by adding an additional morpheme. Now, the same way that we have derivational morphology, which is to do with words that are derived from other words and could change in meaning, inflectional morphology is another way that we can use morphemes in the English language. Now, inflectional morphology is a little bit different from derivational morphology in that inflectional morphology is to do with grammar. So it doesn't really change the meaning of the word that much. It's more to do with conjugation of sometimes verb tenses or making a noun plural, that sort of stuff that's more grammatical. So we know, or we said that in the English language, we have two types of words, content words and function words. And remember that we said that function words have a grammatical role and that they cannot stand on their own without having content words. So we need the to be together with boy for it to communicate meaning, the boy. Otherwise, we couldn't have the on its own. Similarly, we can talk about morphemes that cannot stand on their own, but that they need to be attached to another component of a word, inside a word, so that they can communicate meaning. And this is especially the case when we talk about inflectional morphemes, because inflectional morphemes are purely grammatical. Okay, so they are bound in this sense. They are bound morphemes and they need to be bound to a free morpheme. So inflectional morphemes, they never change the grammatical category of the stems like we saw in derivational morphology. So their function is purely grammatical. I sail the ocean blue. She sails the ocean blue. Christina sailed the ocean blue. Christina has sailed the ocean blue. Christina is sailing the ocean blue. If you pay attention to the verb in all of these sentences, which is sail, you'll see that sail looks different across sentence. In the first sail, there is no morpheme, additional morpheme attached to it. We just have the root of the word, and that is the single morpheme. In the second sentence, we have an additional morpheme being added, sails, an S, and that S is not communicating plural form, that S is conjugated for she, third person singular. She sails. So here it's conjugated for person. Christina sailed, suddenly this ED is attached. This ED, as we know, communicates the past tense or the simple past in the English language to talk about something that happened already. Christina has sailed the ocean blue. So in this case, we have the ED morpheme to talk about the past tense, but it combines with an auxiliary verb, has, and in this case, it makes the present perfect tense. You don't need to know much about this because we won't be discussing tenses yet, but so you can see that the morpheme ED can be used to communicate simple past, but it can also be used in other tenses like the perfect tense. In our last example, we have a different morpheme altogether, which is ing or ing. Ing is used in the progressive tense. So to talk about something that is continuous or ongoing. So Christina is sailing the ocean blue. So in the English language or in modern English language, we have 8 different types of inflectional morphemes or grammatical morphemes. We have the S to form the third person singular. We have the ED to talk about things in the past. We have ing to talk about the progressive tense. We have N to talk about the past participle tense. We have S to talk about the plural form. We have apostrophe S to talk about the possessive form. We have ER to talk about comparative form. And we have ES to talk about the superlative form. And in your last column, you have some examples of how these morphemes are used. So she waits at home. She waited at home. She is eating a donut. Laura has eaten the donuts. She ate the donuts. Maria's hair is short. Maria has shorter hair than Tania. Maria has the shortest hair. So all of these different morphemes fulfill grammatical functions that are in your second column. So inflectional morphology is all to do with grammar and not so much to do with changing the meaning of a word into a new word or adding a new meaning. So inflectional morphemes, not only are they different in terms of their grammatical role, but also in terms of their position inside of a word. So inflectional morphemes typically occur at the end of a word. So they follow the derivational morpheme. They don't come before, they follow the derivational morpheme. So if you have a word such as commit, that's the root of the word, commit. And then you add meant, which is a derivational morpheme, to talk about the act of committing, commitment, a noun. And then you add an additional morpheme, but this morpheme is inflectional or grammatical, commitments, to talk about plural commitments, right? So in that sense, it follows the order. That S follows the derivational morpheme meant. It doesn't come before. You don't say commencement. So note that the order of affixes cannot be altered or reversed. So in summary, here's the difference between inflectional morphology and derivational morphology. So inflectional expresses grammatical changes. Derivational is used to make new words from old ones. And sometimes the words are related to one another. Inflectional doesn't alter the part of speech. In derivational, part of speech can be altered, as we saw in some examples. In inflectional, it usually appears only as suffixes or at the end of a word. In derivational, we can have it occur at the beginning of a word, such as on or re, right? But we can also have it at the end. In inflectional, there's small or no meaning, no change in meaning. In derivational, there could be some meaning change in the word. In inflectional, it's often required by the rules of grammar that you add that morpheme. In derivational, it's never required by the rules of grammar, and you can be coming up with new words. In inflectional, it follows derivational morphemes, and in derivational, it comes before inflectional morphemes. And those are the core differences between these two types of morphemes or morphological structures. So far what we've learned is that in the English language, we have morphemes that can be bound. So they need to be attached to another morpheme, or they can be free and they don't need any other morpheme and they can communicate meaning on their own. Inside of the bound, we have affixes, and the certain roots of words such as sieve, mit, for. In free, we have open class of words. So typically content words like nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs. Also under free morphemes, we can also have closed class of words or function and grammatical words like and, in, the, she, is. They can stand on their own. They don't need a morpheme, so you don't say ands or ins or does. They don't need a morpheme, but they're still function words, so their role is grammatical. And that is what we've learned so far in today's lecture. See you next time.